I'm right down at the bottom of the sweater here, binding off at the hem, and the instructions in the pattern say bind off loosely, and that you do want to bind off loosely, but I'd like to show you how to bind off in pattern, which will help ensure that the bind off is loose, and I think that it also looks a little neater. When you bind off in pattern, your bound off stitches sit right on this bottom edge instead of kind of folding up to show at the front of the work. And here's how you do it. In this case, we have knit one, purl one, rib. And bind off in pattern means work the stitches as you come to them as they are on the needle. So knit the knits and purl the purls. You can look at the stitch on your needle and see, does it have an appearance like a V? That is a knit stitch. Does it have an appearance like a bump? That is a purl stitch. And since these were columns of the same stitches for an inch or so, it can be easier sometimes just to look down the column than to look at what's right on the needle. Here I can see a column of V's. Also, the knit stitches will stand up from the fabric, and the purl stitches will recede. Here's a column of bumps, and it's definitely receding behind those knit columns. So there are different ways to identify your stitches, but as long as you can identify them, you can bind off in pattern without much trouble at all. So I've got a knit stitch here first. I will knit that stitch, and then I will bind off in the usual way by pulling the right hand loop over the left hand loop and off the needle. And now there's a purl, so I bring the yarn forward and purl that stitch, and then bind off in the normal way by pulling one loop over another. And there's another knit, just as expected, and another purl, just as expected. And if as you're going along you realize, oops, I did 2 knits in a row, or I did 2 purls in a row, that doesn't matter. You just pick up where you left off and do the next stitch the right way. That won't cause you any problems. And here's my right hand, so you can see how it looks that way. That was a knit stitch, bind off, yarn to the front, purl stitch, bind off. And another key to keeping things loose is the working yarn. Don't tug on it too hard. Be gentle, and give yourself room between these 2 stitches. So when you add a stitch to the needle, don't add it so that it's right up against its partner. Give them a little room, and then this stitch has to stretch over that room on the needle and over the stitch, and that will help it be loose enough. But just binding off in pattern loosens everything pleasantly. Not too much, just enough. All right, here is the last stitch. The way I handle it is I will pull on the needle to make that last stitch really big. I'll take my scissors and snip the yarn. You still want to leave yourself a long enough tail so that you'll have an easy time weaving it in. And now here's that tail. I'm just going to poke it right through that big loop and then pull down, and that makes essentially a knot, and your bind off is secure.